Hello Giants fans, welcome to Giants Baseball 101. I'm Gabe Vaughn, your host. The Giants beat the Rangers today 4-0. The pitching was excellent again today. Ross Stripling pitched a whole lot better than he did his last outing. He went 4 2/3 innings, didn't allow any runs. Very encouraging from Ross Stripling because the Giants are going to need him to be a true number 2 starter level pitcher. And I mean number 2 starter level on a good team. Really, I would say an exceptional team, even if the Giants are really trying to get into the playoffs through the wild card spot. I think, honestly, the rotation is going to have to be one of their key strengths, and at least be prepared to take them through days when the offense is a bit slow, because they've always had that in the past, with the exception of 2021. It's pretty much just been hot. It was pretty much just hot all the time then, but 2022, they did have their extremely dry streaks, and for the starting pitching to be better so that it can at least take them through and give them a decent chance of winning when their offense does have those dry streaks, that's going to be something that I think the whole team would appreciate. So the rotation, we're just not going to underestimate that here. It was just a good sign, good performance from Ross Stripling, and spring training is the time for a pitcher to get it together if he doesn't have all his mechanics together, or if it's just pitch selection, command, whatever it is that a pitcher needs to get together. Spring training is really the time. Scott Alexander pitched a scoreless inning, so he's still looking really good as a reliever. He's another guy that I think I just need to mention every time he comes in and pitches well, because he's probably an underrated player for the Giants. I think that you don't take for granted what the Giants got when they signed him. I believe it was to a minor league deal. They really got a return on their investment there. Jacob Junis came in to pitch next. He pitched well, too. Didn't allow any runs. Great sign from him. And he's a starter that the Giants, I think there are reasonable prospects of him being effective for the Giants in 2023 due to what we saw from him in 2022. It wasn't that there were no bad starts, but there were some really good ones where he was able to blow hitters away with his slider, and that's what the Giants are going to need him to do again for them in 2023. And I don't know, but I believe Junis is going to be in the rotation. Let's see, you got Webb, Stripling, DeSclafani, Wood, and Junis. I really don't see why he shouldn't be that number 5 guy. And Sean Manaea, to me, he'd be a better bullpen candidate. I don't know how the Giants are going to really organize their roster, but I think it's likely, at least, that Junis will be that number 5 guy. They might experiment with Junis and Manaea making starts in that spot and also helping out in the bullpen. We really just don't know how it's going to turn out, and with Kyle Harrison not ready to join the big league roster at this time, I don't think there will be that kind of extra rotation competition right there. And then obviously, guys like Tristan Beck will have to wait a bit as well, but Tristan Beck, he's in the farm system. He's on the depth chart, and the Giants just needs to be an appropriate time for them to call on him. Lastly, Taylor Rogers pitched, and he struck out 3, which is great whenever a reliever does that. So Taylor Rogers, he was hot. He was on his game today. Blake Sabol had 2 hits again today. He was playing left field, and the fact that Sabol's been playing in the outfield, that left field spot, a lot recently, does that tell you anything? The question is, does that mean anything significant? Well, I'm not exactly sure. There are multiple possibilities here. For one thing, if the Giants were going to carry 3 catchers on their roster, I really don't know how Sabol projects on defense, so I don't want to be ignorant here, but I just don't know that, especially in comparison to someone like Roberto Perez or Austin Wynns. I do think Perez is noted for his glove, so if that's something that's kind of giving a little edge to him, if the Giants were going to carry 3 catchers on their roster, could be an option for them to put maybe Perez in defense when he's, Joey Bart, he'd be the backup catcher, so Joey Bart would be the guy to really be on defense there, but in a 3-catcher system, you might see Blake Sabol playing the outfield, and then whether it's Wynns or Perez that is that kind of third backup man, he might actually be the second man in line for catcher, and Sabol might kind of focus on playing the outfield. That's one option if this trend kind of continues with Sabol. The other thing would just be like a normal two-man catcher system. Say Joey Bart and Blake Sabol are the only catchers the Giants choose to carry on their roster. Well, Bart might play defense at catcher, and Sabol, he'd be the second catcher. He could kind of simultaneously play the role of being the second catcher on the roster as well as like a primary left fielder for them. Very rare. It's always good, and it's a rare thing when you have a catcher that can play the outfield. This would be a very rare situation for a ball team to use, but if the Giants wanted to exploit that here and put Bart in at defense, and Blake Sabol, he's Bart's backup at catcher. He's the second catcher on the team, but when not needed at that position, he plays left field if he is the Giants' primary left fielder. And Mitch Haniger, he was going to be an outfielder. He might not be ready for opening day, which, at least for the start of the season, it could really make such a scenario look super presentable and attractive for the Giants. So Blake Sabol, he's not giving up his role as the backup catcher. I could see that, especially if Mitch Haniger does not return in time for opening day. That could be an option. And as for just having a catcher play DH, I mean, you probably want to save that spot. That the Giants, if Blake Sabol's decent at left field and Joey Bart's decent at catcher in terms of defense, I mean, Jock Peterson, he'd be the guy you'd really want to come out of the outfield, right? And that's what they're planning to do. And I believe that it is the right move for the Giants to put Jock Peterson in at DH. So some last things to kind of think about here. While we're looking at these prospects, at Blake Sabol and Casey Schmidt and Bryce Johnson, I think the thing to remember is that consistency might make or break them. It might be in fact, maybe you could just say it will for some of these guys. It will be the determining factor. And the Giants, you just remember their history of like the last 6 or 7 years. It's just, they haven't been good on consistency with promising young players. And sometimes they have, but sometimes they really haven't. It could go from guys who had like extended times where they were like performing well, like Joe Panik. I mean, he's really the only example I can think of at the moment of a guy who had an extended streak as like a superstar player. That was the case with Panik, and he didn't keep that up long enough to have any chance of being in the Hall of Fame or anything. That's for sure. He just kind of drifted off into poor performance. And I mean, Panik, he's an interesting baseball story. First few years are good, and that's kind of pretty much all, at least as far as I know. But what you really think of when you think of like promising prospects or promising talent that fades away, it's probably the starting pitchers that would most likely come to your mind first and foremost, because that's just been a thing with the Giants. And maybe the most famous example is Chris Heston with his no-hitter in 2015, and then plenty of multi-hitters after that, if I may use that term. By the way, it's just kind of interesting, but I was reading this article, I believe it was from 2018. It was this Around the Foghorn article where the author basically speculates that Chris Stratton, a starter who debuted in 2016 and played through 2018, this guy speculates that Chris Stratton was actually Chris Heston in disguise, that he changed his name and went in as somebody else. And he writes this, he says this, basically because he's never seen Heston and Stratton on the same roster before, like one of them's in the minors or injured or whatever, and they look the same and just a bunch of things. Now, I will just say, based on the tone of the article, I don't believe he was serious. I think this was a joke. I don't think that this Around the Foghorn writer was meaning a conspiracy theory or anything. I don't believe it was serious. I think he was kidding. He knows they're not the same person. But it just brings up an interesting point that they had similar rises and downfalls, right? There's some talent there, but they get hit super hard and their careers fade away. I mean, actually, Chris Stratton, he did go on to be effective, at least for a couple years, reliever, I believe it was, for the Pirates. Now I think he's kind of going back to being mediocre, but just to get the point with the Giants, it's the same thing with Ty Block, really, and Andrew Suarez. You just see these starters who, after a while, you say like their good performance, it just, well, it certainly didn't last long enough to win the Giants a championship. I'll tell you that, and at least with in the Joe Panic case, it did. He played in 2014, and I guess Chris Heston pitched in 2014 too. How well, I don't know, but yeah. Anyway, the Giants haven't won a championship since 2014. So all these promising guys, you see them. I mean, that didn't work. And the other starter, always have to mention when I talk about this, is Tyler Beede. He just, oh boy, I couldn't say enough about his rise and downfall, but never understood why he got the chance to work through everything like he did in 2019. But you got to remember, all this could apply to the hitters too. With Blake Sabol and Blake Sabol and Casey Schmidt and Bryce Johnson, these three guys that we're looking at, even Tyro Estrada, key's going to be consistency, and we don't want them turning out. I mean, another guy who had, in terms of offense, who had potential that didn't. You look. Actually, I'm thinking multiple. You look guys like Mac Williamson and Kelby Tomlinson, and I mean, it didn't. To say that it didn't turn into anything, that's a very true statement. We just want to be better in the future and have guys who actually turn into future Buster Posies and Brandon Crawfords and Brandon Belts and all that. I mean, when your veteran players decline, you got to be able to replace them, and that's exactly what the Giants need to do. Now, what's the solution to all of this? I don't know. It might be their coaching and player development staff, and that obviously would include minor leagues just as well as majors, because guys have to develop in the minors, and even after they make their MLB debuts, whether to make room on the roster for returning injured players or new signings, or because they're performing badly, or a combination of both, those guys are going to be sent to the minors again most likely. So it could be just inside the organization. It's how the Giants work with their players that's going to make all of the difference. And it could still be who they're selecting in the draft and how they're going about it, and some of that, I think that could come into play too. It's just going to be a combination of all of those factors. Really complex, but the way baseball works. Thank you for watching. This has been Giants Baseball 101. Please subscribe if you haven't. Please make sure to subscribe. We can do better than last year. Get a big group of fans here. Also, please leave questions and comments. I'll try to get back to you on those. I'll see you next time on Giants Baseball 101.